Atlanta Thank you. I started working at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, where I met Nikki. I was a content producer and I covered viral news, entertainment news, and culture. And I really started to hone in on my interest, which is Black entertainment and culture. So I did a lot of that groundwork at Jet and Ebony because those magazines are famous for producing content around Black culture. And I finally was able to do that at the AJC. So I've interviewed folks like Michael B. Jordan and Taraji P. Henson and Yara Shahidi, and Nikki has helped me secure a lot of those interviews. So I'm grateful for her for that. After about 3 years, I transitioned to the digital team where I became the multi-platform audience specialist. And that is just a fancy way to say I dabble in different products for the AJC. So I began working on the newsroom's newsletters. I helped more with social media accounts and I helped to manage the homepage. And then just a couple of months ago, I got promoted to my current position, which is the newsletter coach. In this position, I continue to manage newsletters, but I also work with senior leadership to help us develop new strategies to make our newsletters a lot better. A part of that work included consolidating the newsletters at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. When I first was hired, we had about 37, 36 newsletters. And within the last year, we have consolidated them down to 26 newsletters, which is still a lot, but we're working through that and discovering new audiences. And in my role, I help kind of navigate what their journey looks like for us. Any questions so far about my journey? I wanted to give you all a general idea of what a day looks like for me. It changes daily. Every day looks different, but a typical day for me starts early at 7 a.m. I'm still working on developing a routine where, I wake up early, I don't know, meditate, do some yoga, drink some water. But right now, it's pretty rushed with me waking up at 6:30 in the morning, trying to make sure I'm online by 7 a.m. Once I'm online, I start prepping one of our first newsletters, which is the AM Daily newsletter. It goes out every day at 8 in the morning. After I finish that newsletter, we have another daily called The Morning Jolt. It's a politics newsletter that subscribers pay for. It is not free. After that, I go through a variety of meetings. It could be a products meeting about shaping a new newsletter or updating any templates, or I could be in an engagement meeting where the newsroom is discussing new ideas and what can be expected in the print and digital versions of our products. I also do some newsletter training. There are a couple of other folks at the AJC who help produce newsletters. So I teach them about the platforms that we use and how to pick content for a particular newsletter. And then maybe I'll do lunch. Sometimes I take a break to actually do that. Sometimes I don't, or sometimes I'm eating it at my desk, but I'm trying to do a better job of having balance. After my lunch break is over, I continue to work on other newsletters. We have another daily politics newsletter that is free, as opposed to the Jolt, which is not. That goes out around 3 o'clock. And then there are other weekly newsletters that I organize. And then I use the rest of my day to strategize and analyze any metrics that we have. So my strategizing could look like collaborating with PR folks on story ideas. We get tons of pitches every day. And if anything piques my interest, I like to schedule meetings with folks to see what they have in mind, to see how we can be of service to each other. In terms of analyzing metrics, I take a look at our open rates and our click rates. I also think about or look at how long people stay on the story, or how long they scroll, how far they scroll down to a newsletter. That helps us determine what we need to change or what we need to keep the same. And then other reminders could be following up with our marketing and ads team. They work with a lot of corporations who use our audience lists to send out promotional emails. For example, there are some universities who reach out to us and say, hey, can we use your email list to talk about this new program that we have at our college that we want folks to enroll into? Or it could be a job posting. People want to utilize our email list because we have one that is catered to folks who are on the job hunt. So following up with marketing on brand sends could look something like that. Sending metrics reports to my manager is something that I work on. And then prepping for Unapologetically ATL, which is a new newsletter we just launched. I'll talk more about that later in our session. I prepare for that meeting because it's a weekly one. And then I could also be approving copy for special email sends that we receive. And a couple of other things that I wanted to note about my day-to-day. The AJC, as I mentioned, has about 26 newsletters. I manage about 75% of them. There are only, I would say, maybe 4 that I don't manage. We do have a sports newsletter that I don't manage. So for all the sports folks out there, I know how to do it, but it's not one that I oversee. And our newsletters cover a variety of topics. So like I mentioned, we have a sports newsletter, but we also have a things to do newsletter, which talks about events that you can attend in Atlanta or things you can do around the city. And it doesn't just cover the Atlanta area, it covers the metro area. Also, we have a newsletter on food and dining, which is one of my favorites because the pictures always look so appetizing. And I'm mostly building that newsletter when I'm hungry, which is probably not a great idea, but that's one of my favorites. We also have a daily newsletter that covers our local politics, our local business stories, and some lifestyle coverage. Our afternoon newsletter and our evening newsletters follow the same type of format. We have Unapologetically ATL, like I mentioned, which is new, and it covers our Black community. So we have a lot of things for people to choose from. The goal is to have variety so that we can attract a lot of different audiences. And the position that I'm in now is very new. There has not been a position like this at the AJC before. I've been in it for about 3 to 4 months now. So I'm still finding my groove and understanding what the position looks like. So, I'm learning as I go.
That's exactly what I was saying. How I love how you transition.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit also, just to FYI, about unapologetically ATL in our last class.
That makes me really happy. We're going to dive more into how all of that came together. So thanks for the alley. You see, y'all, I use a sports term, Okay. Okay, so why are newsletters important? They are important for a variety of reasons. One of the most important is to boost engagement. When you send out a newsletter, it is an opportunity for you to drive your page views all the way up. Depending on what kind of content you have in your newsletter, there's often a CTA included where folks can either read a snippet of the story, read the entire story, or read just the headline for the story. And once you click it, it'll send you back to your website.
Can you share with us, sorry to interrupt you, can you share with us what CTA is?
Oh yes, a CTA is a call to action. So you want to include that on products so you can direct your readers and tell your audience what you want them to do. So if you want them to sign up for something, you need to explicitly state that. Or if you want them to read more on the story, you need to explicitly state that. It just helps the reader guide their eye throughout the product that they're reading. It also helps you with your social media following. Within a newsletter, you can plug whatever social channels that you have. So the Atlanta Journal-Constitution has several. We have several Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages. And depending on the newsletter, those social media pages that we link will directly tie into the topic of that particular newsletter. It's also an opportunity to promote newsroom products or events. So we have events throughout the year. They've been virtual, obviously, because we're still in a pandemic, but we have a lot of community conversation events. For example, when we were doing the mayoral campaigns, when we were in election season, we did a lot of debates online and we were able to promote those events in our newsletters. So if we had a promotional event, it could look like, hey, tune in for this community conversation that is coming up Tuesday at 7 p.m. Click here, call to action, and you could click here to register for the event and watch it when it went live. It also helps to increase revenue. The AJC has both free and premium newsletters. So we have premium newsletters that come with your subscription, which I believe is, I should know this, but I believe the subscription is maybe $9.99 a month. I hope that's correct. And a part of your subscription comes with having access to premium newsletters. And that obviously will help increase company revenue, which is something corporations will always want because we do have to keep the lights on, and having newsletters that folks pay for helps us make money. And then also having a newsletter helps you grow and maintain your audiences. So depending on the goal of a newsletter, you can do both. So if you want to introduce people to your brand, you can provide free newsletters that folks can sign up with. I have an editor who uses an example about dating a product before you commit to paying for a subscription. So some of our intro newsletters do that. We want to just give you a touch of what the AJC can offer, from newsletters to topics to events before you commit to actually paying for a subscription and unlocking other services that we provide. And if you want to retain paying customers, you can also do that with newsletters. So there are newsletters that we only offer to paying customers, and the content can be, a lot more elaborate. It can be more compelling. It can be more engaging. And then it's an opportunity to help folks get deals. So sometimes we'll run a contest for free tickets. For example, we had a contest a couple of months ago and we were offering free Falcons tickets. And that's something that we did for premium subscribers. So I want to delve a little bit more into what our audiences look like. And I was looking at some of the other people who have presented before you, so you might be a little familiar with an audience funnel. This is a visual of it. It's just a visual way to think about the journey you want your audiences to take while they're exchanging with your brand. So the top of the funnel is where you want to kind of just create an awareness about who you are and what you're offering. Once you do that, you want people to get a little bit more interested by actually signing up for one of your offerings. Once they do that, you offer more content and they might convert. And when we say conversion, we're talking about folks who go from free customers to paying customers. And then once they get into the habit, they can sign up for additional products and then remain loyal, hopefully for forever. So that is just what the funnel kind of looks like. Does that make sense to people? Any questions so far? Creating a newsletter. So here are a couple of things you should consider when you are building a newsletter. And I'll speak for myself personally. These are things that I consider. You want to consider the type of content that you have. I'm lucky because the AJC provides a variety of content, a lot for me to choose from, and a lot of it is compelling. So I don't have a hard time finding content, but you want to make sure that when you are selecting or picking content to go into the newsletter, you want to pick your punchiest things, the things that grab people's attention the most. And you can have a voice newsletter or a curated newsletter. The difference is that a voice newsletter follows more of a narrative trend. So if you're looking at a voice newsletter, you will have maybe a reporter who will explain how they captured the story, or they'll give more detail about some behind the scenes that they used. And they may even tell you what their process was along the way. If you have a more curated story, those are typically easier to put together because it's simply just a link and a CTA or read more and a headline that will attract people back to the page view. My personal favorite is a voice newsletter because I think it allows journalists to showcase their personality a little bit more. And I know a lot of people who follow journalists more than they follow a publication. So if you have your eyes tuned on to Nikki Smith and she is producing a newsletter, you can delve more into her personality, delve more into her process, and understand, why she's writing the story based on a voice newsletter. So I enjoy that process a lot. We have about maybe 3 newsletters that use the voiced format, and one of my goals is to make sure all of our newsletters have a little bit of voice. Another example of a voice newsletter that we have is the Morning Jolt. It is a paid subscription, as I mentioned before. It covers all things politics. Our politics reporters are so smart and they have so much access. Some of them even have desks at the Gold Dome. So it's written as a blog and they give you some really inside exclusives on what's happening at the Gold Dome, what bills are being passed, what politicians that they are speaking to, who's raising money. And it's just a more personal take. We also have the coronavirus newsletter. I'm really looking forward to sunsetting the newsletter because I don't want to be in a pandemic anymore. And hopefully there will not be a need for it much longer. But we have a coronavirus newsletter that is also voiced. So some of our reporters who are covering the topic heavily begin that newsletter by, again, delving more deeply into what the story is about and adding a little bit of personal flair to it. And unapologetically, ATL does that as well. The example that you see on the screen, this image is our evening update. It follows the curated pattern. So when you sign up for a newsletter like this, you'll see the headline, a photo, maybe a brief description, and then a read more CTA. And once you click that, you will go to the website where you can read the story in its entirety. Our voice newsletters, you can read the entire article within the newsletter as opposed to going back to the website. Another thing you want to consider when creating the newsletter is frequency. So when I say frequency, I'm talking about time of day, how often the newsletter is sent out. We have daily newsletters, we have weekly newsletters, we have bi-weekly newsletters, and we have some monthly newsletters. The best way to determine when to send a newsletter is just to look at your data or to look at the amount of content that you have available. Since we're a news organization, we will have a politics story every day, several politics news stories every day. That's the reason why the Morning Jolt and the free politics newsletters occur daily. We have our AM newsletter. That's another reason we have it daily, because we'll never have a shortage of politics stories or business stories or lifestyle stories. For something like unapologetically ATL, this is something we're working on. The Black content or the Black culture content doesn't happen as frequently. So since we gather it a little bit slower, we decided to make sure that that newsletter was weekly. And the same could be said for a food and dining newsletter or an Access Atlanta newsletter. If the content is coming in more slower, as the AJC, we focus a lot on investigative reporting and government reporting. So we don't have a shortage of those, but sometimes our more lifestyle coverage comes in at a slower pace than our other content. So those we would send on a weekly or a monthly basis. Another thing to consider when creating a newsletter is the metrics. So we look at open rate a lot, and open rate helps us to determine who's actually clicking and opening the email when it sends. You can send an email all day long, but if it's just sitting in somebody's inbox untouched, then you're probably not doing a great job with making sure that your content or your subject line is compelling. We also look at click rates, and once you are actually inside of a newsletter, if you're clicking around on stories and clicking back to the website, that means that folks are engaged with your story and they want to know more about the product or the story that you're providing. Number of signups is also very important. Our premium newsletters have high subscriber counts. For example, the evening update has about 60,000 subscribers. So we count that as a good thing. And conversion rate is another thing that we look at. How many people started off being free subscribers and are they now paying subscribers? That's the conversion rate. That often determines a successful newsletter. In my role, I'm also collaborating with metrics a lot more to see what other data is available. So one of our data analysis is taking a look at how long people actually stay on a newsletter and how far they scroll down to the bottom of the page and how often they frequent the website after first opening the newsletter. So we're trying to expand the way we think about metrics and how we can use that to improve. Building new audiences. I will say this is I'll be transparent. The AJC sometimes struggles with building new audiences. So we are trying something new. Within the last 6 months, we've been delving into this topic a little bit more, which is how unapologetically ATL came to be. When we started doing that, we wanted to consider what our underserved communities were, and we used our data to help us determine that. The AJC currently has a readership that is mostly white. So we were wondering, well, where are the Black folks at? So we wanted to create something that catered more to our Black community. And we noticed that they were underserved. We also wanted to identify any blind spots. And again, the Black community was one of them. You want to think about topics that are not covered in your organization or not covered often. Think about the things that you are naturally curious about. When I first got to the AJC, I saw that one of the blind spots was just more culture and trendy topics. So I was first tasked with covering a lot of career news and health news, things that didn't really pique my interest. But as a journalist, that is something that'll happen. You'll write things that you're not interested in. But I started pitching things that I was naturally curious about, things that were naturally crossing my timeline, stuff that I saw on Twitter, stuff that I saw on Instagram, and I would pitch that to my news editor and we would try things out. I hope you have managers that let you experiment. We would try things out, they would be successful, and we would just rinse and repeat. So things that you're naturally curious about in your daily life might be blind spots for the organization that you're working for. Don't be afraid to bring up those topics.
Could you like I guess give an example of a blind spot that you like presented to your manager?
Yes. So one of my favorite projects that I've worked on at the AJC is a series called ATL Close Up, and it was a video series that explored influencers in the city. At the time, the AJC did not follow influencers at all. A lot of the reporters didn't really know what an influencer was. So we took the opportunity to use the series to talk about the local influencers in the city. So it could look like somebody who has a big following on social media, whether they were an at-home chef who had a big following, or if they were a comedian on social media, whether they were an actor on social media. We used that series to not only highlight what their career was, but also to highlight different areas in the city that the AJC normally doesn't cover. So we covered 5 different topics with the series: where folks like to eat, where folks like to shop, where people like to party, a hidden gem, and is one I'm not thinking of, but there were 5. So we would interview our influencers at one of the subject or one of the spots that they listed in the city. We would get permission from the restaurant or the bookstore or wherever we were doing the shoot. And they would basically take us through their ATL map and tell us their favorite things to do in the city. So that was one of the blind spots that I helped uncover at the AJC.
Thank you for sharing. And also, that sounds very cool.
Yeah, I'll send y'all links to it. We had to take a break because, the pandemic, and we weren't able to do as much in-person filming, but hopefully things will stay calm and we can start producing it again. I loved doing that series.
Thank you.
No problem. Another thing to consider when building your audience, you want to be really data-driven. Now, this is something, I'll say, hey, this is a blind spot for me. Like, I'm not great at examining data, but I want to be better at it. The AJC has maybe a team of about 3 or 4 people who do this on a daily basis, but it's really important to check in with your data frequently. You want to know that your numbers are growing or decreasing, if your open and click rates are growing or decreasing, because if they are decreasing, you need to implement new strategies to help make sure that your audiences are being maintained. And you want to understand your demographic. So one thing that we're working on with Unapologetically ATL, as I mentioned, it's a newsletter for Black people in Atlanta. We need to make sure that the people that we are attracting are Black, so that's something we want to constantly delve into. And then also just conducting outreach. Ask your readers what they're into. You can do this by conducting surveys and polls to determine what their interests are. And it'll also help you understand what your readers' habits are. And don't be afraid to ask for feedback. People are mean on social media, but you can find the people who are giving you valuable feedback. I think that's really, really helpful. Not being afraid to ask. You don't need to assume that you know what your readers know. You need to have data to back up what you produce. Unapologetically ATL, my new favorite thing that I'm working on at the AJC. It is a free weekly newsletter that explores the stories, trends, and events shaping Black culture in Atlanta. We launched this newsletter in September, and this is a newsletter that is catered to our audiences that are at the top of that funnel that I mentioned a couple of slides back. So the goal of it is to just make folks aware that the AJC exists and that we have content for the Black community. This newsletter is probably our most experimental one to date. It includes elements and features that no other newsletter has. So as I mentioned earlier, you can read the entire first story within the newsletter as opposed to clicking back to the website. Then we also have supplemental stories right under that where you do have to click on it to go back to the website. But we also have a Spotify playlist that is curated by the different Black reporters in the newsroom. And then we have a on tap section where we allow different Black reporters in the newsroom to tell our audience what they're interested in right now. So it could be a movie, a TV show, a podcast, a new artist, an event, a person. I recently wrote about Abbott Elementary because I think the show was great. I love Quinta B, and I've been following her career for a long time. So that is what I'm in tune with right now. Today's issue, Ernie Suggs, who you see in the photograph on the slide, he wrote today's On Tap, and it's about a book called The Underground Railroad. So we just wanted to give our Black reporters an opportunity to, again, just showcase their personality and tap into the audiences that we're catering to with Unapologetically. This newsletter also has a photo of the week where we feature a photo that's about Black culture. So this week, it was a photo of New Edition because they recently performed at State Farm Arena over the weekend. Sometimes we also use the photo of the week as a commemorative piece to someone. A renowned journalist, Valerie Boyd, passed away recently, and we use that to make a tribute to her. We also have a video of the week section in Unapologetically. Today's issue was also one that gave tribute to somebody who has passed. John Lewis would have turned 82 years old this week. So we had a throwback video of him talking about Selma. And what else is in the newsletter? I think those are all the things. So it is a joy to work on. We have about 5 people who helped put this newsletter together. We meet every week on Mondays to talk about the type of content we want to include in it. We also use the time to brainstorm new ideas. This month, we've obviously been focusing on Black History Month. And the theme of Black History Month is about health and wellness. So a lot of our stories have been focused on that. And so far, Unapologetically has been successful. Within the very first week of launch, we had 1,000 signups, which is a really big deal for the AJC. So now our goal is just to continue growing that number and finding new ways to reach new audiences. And you can sign up here. I would love a sign up from y'all. Okay, here are a couple of newsletter platforms that are commonly used in the industry. The AJC uses Iterable. This is the platform we use to schedule newsletters, produce newsletters, actually send newsletters. I'm in Iterable every day. It's one of the first websites I go to when I log on for work. Before we had Iterable, we used Salesforce to send out newsletters. It served the same purpose as Iterable. Other people use MailChimp. That's one I forgot to add on here. MailChimp is a really popular one. Moosin is another popular one. And Twitter very recently has allowed you to create newsletters on your profile, which I thought was really interesting. I haven't explored that yet, but I thought that was a really cool thing to do. And newsletters to follow. There's so many. One of my favorites is the New York Times cooking newsletter. I get bored with my meals and I love to eat. So I enjoy having a newsletter that is curated based on food. So they allow you to try different food topics or try different recipes every week. And I also love that it's voiced. So when I receive this newsletter, I hear from one of their editors about what they're cooking or what kind of mood they're in food-wise, and then it provides links back to recipes that I might try. This newsletter also comes with an app, which I think is super dope. You can shop for your groceries and check things off, and then you can also follow the recipes on the app. This newsletter is something that I pay for. I can't remember what it is, but it was clearly cheap enough for me to want to give them my money. And then obviously I had to put the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on here because we offer such a variety of topics. The Lily is one that caters to women. It's from the Washington Post, I believe. 5 Things from CNN is really great, and the Skim is great as well. They both follow a similar format by giving you the top news stories of the day. The Skim is probably one of the first newsletters that I ever signed up for, and it really helped expand what I knew about the world. Usually I'm just kind of in tune with Atlanta news and maybe Georgia news, maybe national news, but I think the Skim does a really good job of covering international news in a fun way. And then Axios is super popular, and LT in the City is a newsletter that I follow. It is from a blogger. Her name is L'Oreal Thompson Payton, and she has a weekly blog where she just covers lifestyle stuff and things that are happening in her life. She's also in the middle of writing a book, so some of her newsletters follow her journey for writing a book. Digital journalism. So I wanted to briefly delve into my personal definition of digital journalism. I think a digital journalist just uses the internet to produce stories, to distribute stories across a variety of platforms just to expand their reach and to grow audiences. And you can do this in so many ways. There are several roles that cover digital journalism. You can be a regular beat reporter who covers things for an online publication. You can be a homepage producer where you determine the stories that folks see on the website when they first log on. You could be a newsletter editor like me. You could be a photographer. I think I heard photographer in the introductions. Social media manager is another one. I feel like people associate digital journalism with social media manager, which is the case, but there's so much more. I know an app developer who works on CNN's app on the daily. You can design graphics. We have a fabulous data journalist at the AJC. His name is Nick. He uses data and metrics to help tell stories. So he creates these, I wouldn't call them fun because some of the topics are not fun, but he creates a lot of different graphics and charts to help tell stories. You could be a partnership coordinator. The AJC just hired somebody who is helping us collaborate with other organizations throughout the city so we can cross promote one another's products. So one example is Capital B. They just launched a couple of months ago. So we now have a partnership with them. If we have a story that they're interested in, they can share it on their website and vice versa. That's a part of digital journalism. You could be a videographer, or you could be a podcaster, or you could be an SEO specialist. Everyone should have a little bit of SEO skill set in their back pocket. Okay, Andy, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no problem. I wanted to add, that I work in photography now. I started doing that when I came back this year after COVID. I had my camera back home, but I wasn't able to use it much. But this year I've definitely, taken off, have a little side hustle as well. And so it's worked out, and then obviously working with WAB, as Professor Smith mentioned, when I go out to certain events, I have to not only record, but I also have to take pictures of the people that are, at these events. And so I've become rather multifaceted in my journalism this year. So that's been definitely a benefit.
I think that's a plus. I have, I'm no photographer, but I do have a Nikon camera that I've had since I was in grad school. My dad got it for me. It was actually a requirement for school. It's a little dusty. I don't use it as much as I should, but I think that's great. Everything that you're doing. When I was a content producer, I had the chance to cover different festivals that were happening throughout the city. So that was a good opportunity for me to use my camera, and the pictures that I captured were posted on Instagram. They were posted on Twitter as well as on the website. So I love that you are juggling a bunch of different tasks. That's super helpful. What do you need to be a successful journalist? An interest in the world around you and a passion for compelling storytelling and innovative audience engagement. One of the reasons that I got into journalism is because I love to tell stories. I was an English major. Before I was an English major, I was actually an education major. And during my freshman year, they got rid of the entire education department because we were at the beginning of the recession and they were trying to figure out where to make cuts. And they decided to cut the education department, which I thought was so ironic because this is an educational institution and you're gonna cut the education department. But that's okay because I'm happy with my career choice now. So I ended up delving into English, and I was always a great writer in high school. Writing came pretty easily to me. So I figured that would be a good path to follow. Then I realized I wanted to be a little bit more creative. I had a couple of friends who worked in the Spelman Theater department, and I too tacked that on to my major, and that felt like I was being a lot more creative, a lot more hands-on. I did a lot of stage management. I was not on the stage, y'all. I do not act, but I was doing a lot of stage management. I did props, I ran sound, I ran lights. So I love seeing something, I love seeing an idea start, and I love seeing it executed all the way out. So it was really fun to be a part of those productions. And again, just tell stories. And then once I got to grad school, I started learning the basics about journalism. And then I understood that entertainment and culture were the topics that I cared most about. And I wanted to figure out how to best capture stories that cover Black life. So being a natural storyteller, I think, is really important to being a successful journalism. I think Nikki might have mentioned this earlier about being adaptable. Now that's something that I wish I had known before getting into journalism, because I was not adaptable at first. When I got to the AJC, I was still thinking about Ebony and Jet and all the great Black entertainment coverage that I had done, and telling it only in maybe two ways, and that was in print and that was online. But when I got to AJC, I realized that I needed to be adaptable, learn more about social media, learn more about newsletters, be at events covering things live in action, doing hosting. So being adaptable is extremely important because the industry is always changing, and you want to make sure that you are keeping up and not falling behind. You also just want to be naturally curious. As I mentioned before, identifying blind spots within your organization. What are you naturally curious about that is not being served by your organization? Being creative, being innovative, and having good news judgment. That's particularly important as a newsletter editor. I am picking stories that go into our newsletter. So I need to be able to pick stories that I know our readers will engage with the most. So when you have a news organization, it's important to know who your audience is. I know that my audience is really into politics and investigative journalism. So when I am building the AM newsletter or the politics newsletters or newsletters that are geared to those specific topics, I want to make sure I'm picking the best of the best. You also should be vocal if you want to be a successful journalist. Again, just making sure that your newsroom is up to date on the blind spots that they might have. Don't be afraid to speak up on things that you see covering, or things that you see in your community that might not be covered. You want to be data driven. Again, you don't want to assume that you know what your audience likes. You want to make sure that you have data and metrics to back that up. Have overall passion and be a forever learner. I remember when my dad was picking me up from Spelman after my freshman year, I had just finished finals. I was tired. All I wanted to do was enjoy the 6-hour ride back to Memphis, which is where I'm from, in silence. I got in the car and my dad started asking me questions about the exam and what I had learned. And I no longer wanted to recite what I had learned. I had just done that during finals week. And he saw that I was annoyed with him. And he was like, you never stop being a student, no matter how tired you are. And that's something that has really lived with me. And I apply that even in my career. I never stopped being a learner. When I first started doing newsletters, I was nervous and I was intimidated because I had never created a newsletter before, but I didn't need to be afraid to learn how to do it. So I'm always learning and adapting and trying to gain new skills. I just signed up for a webinar that's happening next week about how to build newsletter audiences. So you want to make sure you're being a forever learner and knowing when to rest, sit down, go to sleep, take a nap, go for a walk. Sometimes being in the news industry is difficult because we don't report on good news all the time, which is why I prefer Black culture entertainment, because that makes me happier. But the newsroom can get very, very heavy. So it's important to take care of yourself and to take breaks and make sure you have boundaries around when you want to work and how much you're working and how much you devote to your career and how much you just want to devote to your hobbies. When I log off at 5 o'clock, do not call me unless it's breaking news. But other than that, I'm gonna be taking a nap. I will be watching Married at First Sight. I'm gonna be scrolling through Instagram. So just make sure you know when to rest and that you're prioritizing your mental health. Okay, that's the end. You can keep in touch with me in all these ways. I have a website which you can have access to things that I have written and video interviews that I've done. I have a reel there that also has a more comprehensive look at what I've done in my career over the past, 8 or 9 years. And then I have Twitter and Instagram. I guess I should have included LinkedIn, but I wanted to be honest because I don't check LinkedIn very often. Are there questions?
I was gonna ask, sort of while you've been working in digital journalism, I know you talked about how you had to change the scope of how you thought of journalism, being like kind of just only on print. So as far as like digital journalism as a whole, like what has changed the most while you've been working?
I would say what has changed the most is probably attention to the variety of products you can offer as a journalist. So the newsletters is a really good example of that. When I first made it to the AJC in 2016, it was just something that we kind of did. There were not a lot of goals or parameters set behind what makes a successful newsletter. We were kind of just doing it to be doing it. But now I see that the trend is changing more and folks are being more intentional about how to create newsletters and how that can help create revenue. So I would say just seeing folks really take on the variety of products that you can produce as a newsroom. It's not just about having a website, having a social media presence and having a paper, it's also about newsletters. It's about events. It's about partnerships. That's the biggest change I think I've seen.
Thank you.
My question is rather broad, but I was going to ask, what would you say is the biggest, challenge that you've faced in digital journalism or just journalism period in your transition from, college to a professional career in journalism?
Okay, I'll try not to ramble. One that comes to mind is trying to get a job after I finished grad school. I finished grad school. I think I finished maybe December 2013. I didn't get a job until August 2014. So that was definitely a challenge for me. I was applying and nothing was coming up. But because I had that internship with Jet and Ebony magazine, when they did have an opening, they thought of me. And even though I wasn't working a full-time job within those 8 months after I finished school, I was still freelancing and trying to make sure that I networked across. So that was definitely a challenge, trying to get a job. Another challenge is just being adaptable. I found myself being frustrated at the AJC in the beginning because I was not covering the topics that I was used to covering, and I wasn't adapting to the fast pace of journalism. When I first got to the AJC, we had this team called the audience team, and we were trying something new. And then after a couple months, they got rid of the audience team, and they were trying to figure out where my group of folks fit in the newsroom again. So constantly switching teams is a challenge for me, but that's just the reality of the industry right now. Folks trying to figure out how to organize their departments. But being adaptable will help you ease some of that frustration, I think.
Got you. Thank you.
What other questions do you all have? Well,
Nikki, is
Oh,
there anything else you wanted me to delve into?
Actually, let me stop recording.